History 1. Years ago, I lived in Springfield, Illinois, in an apartment with two good friends. We were all college students living the party life. I don't really feel comfortable using their real names in this story, so I'll just call them Dave and Mike. I will also refer to myself as Tom for the same reason. I worked at a local restaurant and was returning one night from a long shift. Dave and Mike were on the couch having a few beers and just shooting the breeze. This was the usual sight when I came home from work. I grabbed a brew and sat down to chat with my friends when they told me about the wild event that had happened a few hours earlier. "Man, we saw the craziest thing while you were at work," Dave said. "Yeah, there was this weird dude just dancing around in our backyard wearing a white long-sleeve shirt and black pants," Mike added. "Dancing?" I asked. "Yeah, man. He was doing Michael Jackson dance moves and making strange noises," Mike responded. They told me they had told him to leave and he ran out of the yard in a panic. We figured it was probably just some strange weirdo since the small city was sort of filled with those types of folks. Besides, it seemed like he didn't cause any harm other than trespassing in our backyard. A week passed, and it was a nice Friday night. Me and the boys were playing cards at our dining table and just hanging out. We were in a very heated match until we heard the famous hee-hee sound. "What the hell was that?" Mike asked. The three of us ran to the back window to take a look. There he was, dancing and moonwalking again. It was midnight on a Friday. Didn't he have anything better to do? I then stepped out and said, "Hey man, what's going on?" He responded by singing Michael Jackson phrases over and over again. It was a bit odd and honestly frightening, since we had no clue if this guy was dangerous or not. The strangest part was that he even resembled Michael Jackson a bit. He had long black hair, pale skin, and a slender frame. "Dude, you have 10 seconds to get out of the yard or I'm going to beat the crap out of you," Mike said. The man ran out of our yard and escaped through the side gate. We watched him run down the street and then make a right near the main road that runs through Springfield. The three of us just laughed it off, thinking he was an unstable stranger messing with us. The next morning, I stepped out to have a cigarette. I was alone in the house since Mike had already left for work, and Dave had spent the night at his girlfriend's house. As I was staring off having my morning coffee and smoke, I noticed something lying in the yard. I went up to it and it scared the crap out of me. It was a life-size dummy of a boy. I had a sigh of relief since, for a moment, I thought it might have been an actual human body. I picked it up and laughed, thinking this must have been from that weirdo from last night. I just laughed and brought it inside, thinking Frank and Mike were going to get a kick out of this. When the guys got home, I had already put the dummy in the bathroom, standing in the shower so that whoever went in there would get a jump scare. As expected, the guys and I had a fun time pranking each other with the dummy until we used it as a home decoration. About 2 days had passed since I found the dummy, and it seemed that Mike's threat had scared the freak off. Mike and I were home watching a movie until we heard a loud bang at the front door. "Hey, where's my little boy?" someone yelled in a scary voice. "I need my little boy," followed by another, "Hee-hee." Mike stood up and peeked through the blinds at the front door window. The man was back and seemed pissed that we had taken his doll. Once again he screamed out a hee-hee as he hit the door. "Dude, you better stop banging on our door or I'm going to mess you up," Mike yelled. The man started stomping and yelling even louder. "I want my little boy, give him back." Mike and I stepped outside to confront the man. "Hey, are you drunk?" Mike asked. The man ran off into the street. I remember him stopping to do some weird dance move before running off. This next part of the story still haunts me every time I think about it. I was at work a few days later. The restaurant was empty and slow, as it usually was during weekdays. Our hostess came up to me and told me that someone had sat down and actually requested me by name. I got excited because I thought it was this girl I was talking to at the time. I headed to the front of the house, excited to see who wanted to see me. To my surprise, it was him VDJ, the man from the last few nights. He was just sitting there at a table in his usual Michael Jackson-styled attire, smiling and waving at me. I went back into the kitchen and froze in fear. How does he know where I work? I thought to myself. I peeked out, and for the first time, I got a good look at his face. He wasn't anyone I recognized. I heard him yell from across the restaurant, another hee-hee, then saying, "Oh, Tom, I'd like to place an order. I'd like to have my little boy back." I have to say this was the most embarrassing and scary thing that had probably ever happened to me. All my coworkers were giggling and laughing at me. One coworker asked who the person was, and I told her that he was a weird stalker harassing me. She asked him to leave, and he stood up and caused a complete scene. "You're ignorant. I want my little boy, and Tom has my little boy." He then started moonwalking and left the restaurant. I remember thinking this was the last straw, and it was time to get this guy to back off for good. I thought it was odd that a grown man who must have been in his 30s had all this time to be out all hours of the night acting this way, as well as running around with a life-sized child doll. Springfield has some strange folks, but this definitely took the cake. This wasn't some cute little joke. It was really weird and beginning to become harassment. I texted the guys and let them know what happened. We all agreed to return his doll to him, and if he continued to come around, we'd get the police involved. When I got home that day, the first thing I did was put the dummy on the porch and left a note. The note read something like, "Hey, please take your friend and leave us alone. If you ever come back around, you'll seriously regret it." About an hour after leaving the dummy on the porch, I stepped out to smoke a cigarette and noticed it was gone. It had only been an hour, and the man must have already grabbed the dummy. The note I had left him was still lying there on the porch. I always get an eerie feeling, thinking he's probably out in our neighborhood, watching us and keeping an eye on his possession. Years have passed, and I haven't lived in that apartment for a long time, but I always wonder what went on with that unstable man and why we were his target. History 2. I was around 9 or 10 when my family moved to a new town. My mother and stepfather, unfortunately, were drug addicts at the time. We always had people coming and going from our home, with all-night parties and such. You wouldn't know they did drugs, though. They did a decent job hiding it from everyone and keeping a clean home. Anyway, we lived in a brand-new double-wide with a semi-finished basement. My bedroom was upstairs, not in the basement. You could easily climb in and out of my window, though I never did. There were many times late at night when I would feel the presence of someone outside the window. We had 2 neighbors within a 5-mile radius, and we were close with them, so I never thought it would be any of them watching me. Feeling like someone was so close to me at night was just disgusting. If you've ever had that feeling, you know what I'm talking about. The feeling of being watched, someone near you. It's just an icky feeling. I felt this way for months. It wasn't every night, but often enough that I still remember it. Enough backstory, let's get into the story. It was a cold winter night, I don't know the time, and my dog was whining to go out. Our double-wide had 2 doors, so I let her out the front door. Since it was cold, I didn't keep the door open or go out with her, but I also didn't need to because she didn't run away. I waited around in the living room until I heard her call at the door to let me know she was ready to come inside. Once I heard it, I began walking to the door, and then I heard footsteps. I froze right there at the door. I didn't look outside, but I just knew someone was out there with her. The light was on, but I couldn't bring myself to look. All I thought was that it was freezing out there, and I'm an animal lover, so I just wanted her back inside safe with me. I locked the door and then ran to the side door and yelled her name. I closed the door and waited for her to come around. I waited a few seconds and heard the same footsteps yet again. I didn't want to wake up my parents for some reason. I don't even know what I was thinking. I ran back to the front door and pounded on it. I again waited for my dog while I went inside and then heard the steps again. I could hear them slowly but heavily walking up the stairs and on the deck. I ran to the side door one last time, opened the door and then screamed, "Kia, get in here!" I screamed as loudly as my little girl voice would allow. She came barreling up the stairs and slid through the slight crack in the door I had opened. I slammed and locked the door within a second, and I didn't hear the footsteps anymore. I turned both outside lights off and brought her into my room with me and locked the door. It was a terrifying experience. History 3. For context, I'm a 15-year-old girl living in a medium-sized city. It all began innocently enough. A stranger's gaze lingering a bit too long at the bus stop, a face in the crowd that seemed to appear repeatedly, and the unsettling feeling of eyes on me when there was no one around. At first I brushed it off, attributing it to my overactive imagination. But as the days passed, the uneasiness evolved into a chilling certainty. I had a stalker. The first sign was a series of anonymous messages sent to my social media accounts. The messages hinted at intimate knowledge of my daily routine, my likes, and my dislikes. I tried to dismiss them as pranks, but they grew increasingly personal and unnerving. One evening, as I locked my door and ventured into the dimly lit hallway of my apartment building, a shadowy figure appeared at the end of the corridor. Panic tightened its grip on my chest as I quickened my pace, the echo of footsteps following an ominous synchrony with mine. Then the phone calls started. A raspy voice whispered my name in the dead of night, recounting details of my day that no stranger should know. Sleep became elusive, my thoughts haunted by the unseen observer invading my privacy. I took precautions, changed my routines, and sought solace in crowded places, but the stalker was relentless. The boundaries between day and night blurred as paranoia consumed me. Every face in the crowd became a potential threat, every unfamiliar number on my phone a source of dread. One day, I received a package on my doorstep. Inside was a chilling collection of photographs capturing moments of my life, private, mundane, and intimate. The realization that someone had invaded the sanctity of my home and personal space sent shivers down my spine. Fear became my constant companion, overshadowing even the simplest pleasures. I reported the incidents to the authorities, but the stalker remained elusive, leaving behind only the lingering sense of being pursued by an unseen malevolence. As the days turned into weeks, I couldn't escape the chilling truth that my stalker was always one step ahead. The unnerving certainty that they were watching and waiting became a haunting presence in my every waking moment. In the end, I was left with a profound sense of vulnerability, forever changed by the shadowy specter that had invaded my life. This is still ongoing, and I would really appreciate some advice in the comments. I'm working a job as well as attending high school, and this is the last thing I need. Please stay safe, y'all. History 4. I was an 18-year-old girl at the time when this happened. Just a bit of a disclaimer. I was a heavy drug addict back then. I moved to a new town with my older sister, hoping for a fresh start after breaking up with my high school boyfriend. I was depressed and just wanted to get my life together, but unfortunately that wasn't the case. Being a naive 18-year-old, I fell in with a bad crowd and started using drugs to numb my depression. At this point, I reconnected with an old friend from high school that I used to have a crush on. Let's call him Tim for this story. Tim and I rekindled our friendship quickly and became even closer than we were in high school. One night, my sister, brother Tim, and I decided to drink. After everyone went to bed, Tim and I decided to have some fun together. The day after, everything seemed normal. Our friendship continued, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then I started seeing a guy I'll call Steve. I began developing strong feelings for Steve, but wasn't looking for a relationship as I wanted to give my heart a chance to heal first. I spent a lot of time with him. Tim found out about this and became very obsessive. I told him very firmly that I didn't want a relationship with him, and that he needed to back off because we weren't dating. He laughed it off. Tim would somehow find out whenever I'd sneak out with my friends to use again and would become furious, which I kind of understood. One day I was walking home from a hotel after hanging out with a particular group of friends, and Tim raced up to the sidewalk in his car, demanding I get in. Despite his anger, I safely made it home. A little time passed, and I decided to hang out with Tim. We went to his house, and all seemed good for a while. Then he decided he wanted to have some fun again. I was still single and figured one last time would be okay. I was coming down, and my mind wasn't in a good place. Tim started to become very aggressive and was hurting me. I told him to wait over and over again and tried pushing him off, but nothing worked. He finally stopped after his brother came home and got angry with Tim because he could hear me screaming. I don't know if Tim had done this before, and maybe that's why his brother was so upset. I convinced myself it wasn't an assault and shrugged it off since it wasn't the first time this had happened to me. I spiraled further into my addiction to try to forget it. I wanted to distance myself from Tim, so I sought solace in Steve and started hanging out with him almost every day. Unfortunately, Tim was also friends with my older sister, and I hadn't told her or anyone else about what had happened. One day Tim showed up at my house after I had gotten all dressed up to hang out with Steve. He asked where I was going and I told him. He seemed a little unsettled by this. He handed me a pill, telling me it would help my anxiety. He watched as I took it with a glass of water, then informed me that I wasn't supposed to take the whole thing. I ended up falling asleep a few minutes later. I don't know what happened while I was unconscious, but I know he didn't want me seeing Steve, and physically stopped me from doing so. Thankfully, I woke up the next day, and he was gone. Tim's obsession with me grew worse and worse. He stole Steve's number from my phone and texted him while I was with him, telling him he was making a huge mistake hanging out with me. He would show up at my work and express his anger at me for spending time with Steve. Fast forward a few months, and my sister and I decided it was best for me to move back to my hometown, since I wasn't doing well in the current place with the current people. I finally got clean, met a new guy, and we started dating. I wasn't doing the best mentally, but I was on the right track. I'd been sober for 3 months. My new boyfriend wasn't very kind, so it was still a struggle, but I was trying my hardest to get my life together. One day there was a knock on my door, and Tim was on my doorstep. My sister and I had decided to hang out, and I found out Tim had moved back to my hometown shortly after I did. Tim tried to insinuate that he was still interested in me, but I dismissed his behavior. My boyfriend at the time decided to stop by while Tim was at my house to pick me up. He gave me a kiss when he showed up, and I swear Tim's eyes went black. I had never seen such a scary look on anyone's face before. After I left, I hung out with my boyfriend for a bit and then went to work. When I got home that night, I realized my house had been broken into, and the money I had saved for rent had been stolen. I'm really thankful that's all that happened. I don't know what would have transpired if Tim had broken in while I was there, as I'm pretty sure it was him who did it. Thankfully, I never saw him again after that. My sister ran into him a few times years later, and he still asked about me even after all the time that had passed. I'm doing a lot better now. I'm married to a good guy, have a beautiful child, and my life is much better. I've been clean for 7 years. Tim is thankfully history, and he hasn't bothered me since.